Hey y'all, I'm Shauna. Welcome in or welcome back to the channel and welcome to a new video. Today is part 3 in my 3-part mini series kicking off No Buy January, or low buy year, no buy year. If you are just approaching changing your shopping habits, or maybe it's not a year, maybe it's a quarter or a few months. I hope you've been enjoying it. Today's video, we're talking about some skills or habits, behaviors really, that you may want to consider adopting or focusing on through the duration of your project. Even if you're not doing a no buy year or a low buy year and you're just on the conscious consumer journey, I think that this is also really applicable in focusing on the habits and skills instead of just not buying stuff, because these things are the tools. They are how we get to implement many of the changes that we want to implement. So I'm going to be talking about 5 today. These habits and skills may resonate with you. They may not. Either way, what I would really like to do, or what I hope to do in this video, is to get you to think about what might be the useful skills and habits that would benefit you on your specific journey. So I'm going to share my 5 with you. And this is not an exhaustive list. These are just some of mine. And I'm sure that there are many more that we could think of, or that might be applicable to your specific journey. And as we go through, I'm going to be talking about why I think this is a great skill to focus on and how you might do that. I hope the introduction made it clear just how strong or beneficial focusing on skills and habits can be. I really think that sometimes we put the pressure on ourselves to just not buy stuff, or we come into our no buys or our journeys with these expectations that we can just do the thing. And I've said many times on this channel that sometimes people struggle with their projects because they don't have the requisite skills to do the things that they want to do. And so focusing on habits and skills helps us pinpoint what we want to accomplish and then developing those skills to do that thing. So the first skill that I think would benefit so many people on a conscious consumer journey would be observation, but most specifically, non-judgmental observation. I think this could be an essential skill for so many people because being non-judgmental observers means that we're able to observe our own behaviors, our habits, potentially our triggers, or things that could be roadblocks or hangups, things that you're struggling with. And the more that you can observe, or the better you can get observing in a non-judgmental way, I think the easier it is to be honest with yourself, but then also the more you can learn about what's driving your choices and then also implement solutions or try things out. I really believe that the non-judgment part is a super important part of this, because it is okay to make mistakes or do things that might not be the most beneficial for you. I know that I've participated in shopping behavior that was not the best for me, and it was downright destructive, to be honest. And when we're on a journey, right, when we're on a no buy or a low buy, we can sometimes feel this pressure, as I was just mentioning, to get it right and to know the answers and to not make mistakes. And sometimes we can fear these things because we're afraid of the punishment, and we're afraid of the judgment or the shame or the guilt that can come as a result of this. Sometimes we're not able to fess up to the problematic behavior or be honest with ourselves because we are afraid of the judgment. I know, just personally speaking, that I didn't want to look at my bank account because I didn't want to know. But the reason why I didn't want to know is because it felt like there were consequences to those actions. Yes, there can be real life consequences, such as being in debt, but that extra layer of fear can come from the fear of judgment or the fear of being criticized by yourself or others. And so I've personally found that when there is no risk of judgment or a low risk of judgment, being honest with myself about my own behavior is easier. And during my no buy year, the less judgment I put on myself, the better my project became, because I no longer feared messing up or making mistakes or stumbling or making a purchase I shouldn't have. And I'm not saying I did none of that. I did absolutely no judging whatsoever. But I just think over time, I've gotten better at the being honest with myself because of the lack of judgment. Like now, if I say I spent I overspent $500 as an example. That's more of a statement of fact and not this like berating kind of negativity. I also found my willingness to reflect also increasing the more I was able to be honest with myself. And reflection can be one of those ways where we can become better observers. And this was one of the ways that I became a better observer of my own habits. And I didn't necessarily start as like 10 out of 10, but the more I reflected, the better I got at reflecting. And then the more I observed. And all of that got better without the judgment. So reflection is a great way in, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But also I think one of the goals could be getting to the place where you observe your behavior while it's happening or shortly after it happens. Like maybe you're able to not buy the thing, but then you kind of go through the motions of like observing or thinking about what was happening. It can even start like this. You're coming home from work and you find yourself scrolling on your phone, wanting some new shoes. Okay, Sean, it's 4 p.m. All right, I'm sitting on the train. I'm coming home from work. I'm alone. Okay, how am I feeling? Am I tired? Am I excited? Am I bored? I'm feeling bored. Okay, why? Why am I feeling bored? I'm feeling bored because I have nothing to do. I'm feeling kind of antsy actually, and like I can't sit still, and I that makes me want to scroll. You know what? I'm actually feeling a bit of a nudge to shop. I'm not really sure why, but I'm feeling that right now. That's all it has to start as at first. And over time, you can be able to go through some of those questions fairly quickly, or maybe you develop better questions. You just have to start somewhere. When you become better at being an observer, you become better at noticing your patterns. Maybe after a few days of doing this, you realize that every day on the way home, you want to shop and it's basically like clockwork. This can help you implement solutions. You may be able to get started with this on your own, but this is one where you may want to or find it desirable to get help with becoming an observer of your own behavior, but also learning how to do it in a way that is healthy for you. Or sometimes it's just great to have some assistance. There are some things that I have been an observer of myself, and there are certain areas of my life where I feel like there are greater blind spots than others, and it is great to have some assistance in illuminating those blind spots. I also want to say, and I'll just say it once here, that a lot of people online go on no buys or low buys and they do it just by themselves. And that can create this feeling or this expectation as though we ourselves should also go at it alone, and that we should be able to just get better or become better shoppers, or we're able to just stick to our no buys, no problem, because this is what we're seeing online. Just because something works for somebody else doesn't mean that that thing also in that exact iteration is going to work for you. And there's nothing wrong with getting help to create the solution or the path that is the right one for you. Critical thinking is the next skill that we're going to talk about. And this is one that can also start with some reflection and get better over time. So reflecting and developing a bit of a reflecting routine, whether that's daily or weekly or something else in between, getting that going can have many benefits. Now, when I say developing critical thinking, I'm not calling you dumb or stupid or incapable of doing it. I just think that for a lot of folks who find their shopping to be a problem, what has happened is that we've dialed back or stopped the critical thinking, because it was the critical thinking that got in the way of us being able to shop how we wanted. I include myself in this because my critical thinking was dialed all the way down to zero. So all this really is getting back into practice with critical thinking and starting to turn that dial up slowly. This can start with a reflection routine, as I mentioned, daily, maybe a few times a week, or just weekly, whatever kind of feels right for you. Maybe this starts off as a list of questions, maybe some basic questions. Maybe it develops over time. You could ask yourself, what did you learn this week? What did you find yourself wanting this week? Did you notice any triggers? And maybe the first couple of weeks, your answers are sparse. Maybe your answers kind of elaborate a little bit as you become a better observer. Also, if patterns exist, it may take some time to notice them as well. One of my favorite things to do that helps with critical thinking is a need versus want analysis. This can look a lot of ways, but one of the ways I started doing this, because I realized that my wants and my needs were conflated, and I knew that going into my project, but I eventually created a mechanism for helping me suss them out. So on my wish list, I included a column that said need, want, or unsure. I eventually added a makes life comfortable and I think one more other category. And when I wanted to purchase something, my criteria for buying that thing was that that part of the wish list had to be filled out. And a lot of stuff started off as unsure. Like I would want a blanket as an example. And I wasn't really sure if it was a need or a want, so it would be unsure. And if I ever in any capacity want to buy the blanket, it had to be marked as a need or a want. And seeing all the unsures pop up was really eye-opening as to just how conflated my needs and wants were. But I eventually created this metric because there were so many. Well, all right, what exactly does a need mean? And I started creating criteria for what a need meant that did develop over time. It meant that I didn't have anything like this already. I initially said it was a replacement, but then I found out that not everything that I viewed initially as needing replacing actually met the criteria of a need. Just because you have no more sparkly eyeshadow doesn't actually make that a need. And also, if I marked something in one category, but I eventually a couple weeks later went back and revisited that list and thought that that thing was no longer a want, but a need, or vice versa, every week when I did my weekly check-in, I would check in to ask myself if I noticed any of these changes. And that's where I would mark if anything kind of changed in either direction. One of the things I also did was going through selections of items, and I would go through different parts of my home, like my desk as an example, and I would touch each thing and I would ask myself if this is a need or a want. Like if this thing disappeared and I saw it in the store, would this be a need or a want? And I would also ask myself, would I want to purchase this again? Why or why not? You could do this in small sections at a time. It doesn't have to be your own home. And the point of it is to start thinking about your stuff, putting it in the real context of your life and helping to suss out the needs and the wants, but also what makes a good purchase to you. You could even start there. Go into your closet and picking out your favorite things or your least favorite things. If you have some things that you've wanted to declutter, why are you decluttering this? Why is this not working for you? And I've personally found that when I started doing this, the first time around, I would say, oh, I don't like it anymore. Well, that's no longer a good enough reason. I don't like it or I don't use it is not a good enough reason. Why? Why don't you like it? Why don't you use it? Why don't you wear it? What makes a purchase worth the money to you or a good value for money? One of the things I also did would be sometimes I would kind of get into these flows of just questions. Usually when I would be writing out a reflection, more questions would come to me, and I developed a bit of a question bank. And so every time I did a reflection, I'd add to the question bank, and then maybe the next week I would answer some of those questions, just developing data points for myself and learning about myself and how I think and feel about my possessions and money and values even can come out in some of these reflections. The point is to learn about yourself and to learn about what you value, what triggers you, to learn about your habits and how things, including behaviors and stuff, does or doesn't serve you. The next thing we're going to call delayed gratification or potentially waiting. And one of the hallmark pieces of advice that people say is to wait at least 48 hours before making a purchase. Sometimes people say they want to wait 5 days or they want to wait 7 days. I also showed some videos on the channel where somebody only wants to shop once a quarter. If you have been an overshopper, an overconsumer, waiting can be extremely difficult because we have developed dopamine-driven habits, impulse-driven habits, and pleasure-seeking behavior. And then we can get ourselves into these little roller coasters or these little wheels where we buy something, our mood plateaus, and then we need to feel good again, so we buy something to feel better. Maybe it's just you want to have that little hit of pleasure again. And this could be on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis. So if you are in a pleasure-seeking kind of cycle or you're in a dopamine-driven cycle, waiting can be extremely challenging. And that is one thing I learned very quickly, is that my threshold for waiting at the very beginning of my no-buy was not good. I kind of felt myself almost like crawling the walls, like with itchy skin, like why can't I wait? It seemed like such a normal thing. Like I should be able to wait. I just mentioned some components as to why you might not be able to wait, but there also might be other kind of addictive behavior in there, which might be qualified or part of what I mentioned, the pleasure and the dopamine, but there could be other addictive factors as to why you are having difficulty waiting. So I would, at the beginning of my no-buy, I would wonder, or I would try to figure out, what is my actual threshold for waiting? What is my current threshold? Is it 2 hours? Is it 16 days? Everybody's going to have their own threshold for a comfortable waiting period before you start chafing. I would personally say if your threshold for waiting for anything is under a few days, probably if it's less than somewhere between 3 and 5 days, this would be a great skill to start off with, is to increase the waiting period. Maybe you work on this before going on the no-buy, like working to get your waiting period up so you're able to wait during your no-buy for longer periods. And one of the ways that you can increase waiting is through a couple of tactics. One of them is called progressive delays. And this is a behavioral science strategy. And what they say is to implement this with a distraction technique. So you learn your waiting period. Let's say it is 8 hours. Progressive delays would suggest slowly increasing your threshold by a degree each time. You reward yourself for each time, and then you do it again. And you keep going and you keep going and you keep going. And one of the reasons why distraction techniques are recommended for this waiting period is to distract yourself from the fact that you're waiting. And so you might need a list of distraction techniques and things to try and implement to help increase your waiting period. You are also probably going to need a treats list or a rewards list for things that are non-monetary. You can do this in other facets of your life. It just might not hit as hard to train yourself to, let's say, wait for food as an example, opposed to shopping, just because areas might be different and everybody's relationship to all of their things are very differently. This is also one where you may want to enlist the help of an expert. One of the things that I think that also can work in this area, which for me is kind of like still a strategy that I lean on, I call it the not now but later technique. I've talked a lot about it on the channel. And the essence of this strategy is when you want something, instead of saying no, because your mind can turn this into never, most especially if you are on a no-buy. And because the distance can be so long between when you are allowed to buy it, that can become the never in your mind. And so if I don't buy it now, I will never be able to buy it. So what the not now but later technique does, and this can be implemented with the kind of increasing your waiting threshold, is you say to yourself, let's say it's a pair of boots. Okay, I really want this pair of boots. You're going to get yourself to wait the longest you are able to wait without negative consequences. And at that point, you will reevaluate the purchase. You will reevaluate the decision, and not just like hypothetically like, yeah, I'll get back to it. No, you will have to seriously buy into the idea and actually reevaluate at that time. In that meantime, in that middle window, you can implement distraction techniques to help you calm down or to help you come down from that high. And then at that point, you can reevaluate. The point of this is to get as far away from those feelings of like want and desire where we might not be our most rational and reasonable selves, and kind of get to a place or reevaluate it when we are in a place where we are much more reasonable and rational. This is not going to work for everybody. And so please don't do it if you think it's going to lead to a spiral or a binge. I have personally found it helpful because I have been able to wait long enough where I have been able to come back down to reality and say, you know what? I still want it. I can still feel that. I can acknowledge that. But I know that I don't need it for these reasons. Skill or habit number 4 is experimentation. And I love approaching habits or skills or life really through the lens of experimentation, because it just adds so much more fun to things that may not initially seem fun. And experimentation can be super powerful part of your journey if this is something that appeals to you. and if you think that it may foster some open-mindedness. And one of the reasons why I like experimentation is because it fostered open-mindedness in me. When I think about like a scientific experimentation, they're all about testing and discovery. You may have a hypothesis about how something might work, which gives you something to try. So if you like to be on a no-buy and you have a hypothesis of something that might work, if you view it through the lens of experimentation, you are simply trying out an idea and you're going to see if it's going to work. And if you view it through that lens, it might encourage more positive thinking and also lessen some of those judgments that we might have around failing. Because if you view through the lens of experimentation, not getting the intended result is part of the process and something that we might come to expect in an experiment. And so something not working is still data in which we can learn from and pivot and experiment and try the next thing. For me, it was this lens that kind of kicked that perfectionism to the curb and made me think a lot less about getting it perfect and getting it right. Because if everything's an experimentation, I get to try again next time. I get to try again and try something different. And the next thing I try is going to have more knowledge behind it, more data behind it. And eventually I'll get to the right answer. And you can brainstorm some things that you would like to try or some experiments you'd like to conduct. And I also think the more you experiment, the better you get at conducting experiments. You could also view things through the lens of challenge, which might just be more welcome to you than the lens of experiment. One of my favorites, whether you want to call it an experiment or a challenge, was the minimalist makeup bag. I think I called it a challenge, but it was also an experiment in my mind. And what I did in 2022 was for 30 days, I reduced my makeup to one item per category. Sometimes I would say like you could have a lip gloss and a lipstick like that. You could have like one eyeshadow palette and one eyeshadow single. That was about the gist. I had some hypotheses about things that I think I would learn, did it for 30 days, made a video on it, and then also reflected on the process. And that video was such an instrument in kicking off this experimental approach, and the stuff that I learned there has still stuck with me to this day. It was one of those things that helped me learn what enough looks like for me in my makeup ownership. Where do I like variety? Where don't I like variety? And it's this idea of enoughness that really sticks in my mind about something that I learned in that project. Low Buy Bingo was also another fun experiment, and I do still pull that out from time to time when I'm looking for a little fun. There are so many you can do, from savings challenges. One example would be for the month of January, let's say. Every day you save that dollar's worth. So on the first, you save $1. On the second, you save $2. You could save your coffee money every day, and instead of buying the coffee, you transfer all of that money into your savings account for the month. It doesn't even have to be something that has to do in an overt way with spending or saving. You could do fashion challenges or following makeup tutorials or whatever the case may be, and just run with it. The last potential skill or habit that you may want to consider is contentment. This one is so near and dear to my heart because I did the contentment year in 2022, and I designed a lot of contentment projects in 2022. And so this one, I think, does combine with experimentation. The reason why I found this so valuable is because not shopping or reducing the amount of your shopping means that you're going to lean more on what you already have. And if you want to make this an actual habit where you rely on using what you have, like you want to stop shopping permanently, that means you're going to have to rely on your stuff more permanently. So you're going to have to wear your clothes for years or use your consumables to completion. Even if you can't do that with everything at this moment, if this is a skill you want to have, you're going to have to start somewhere, even if it's imperfect. This is a really big shift from folks who shop all the time or derive some of their pleasure from shopping, or a lot of their pleasure from shopping, as we've already talked about so far. And so in my opinion, contentment goes a long way in making using what you have a more enjoyable experience. And I think it can make that shift a little bit easier. Focusing on contentment can be focusing on the enjoyment of your stuff and the appreciation of your stuff, finding novelty with what you already have, and developing those kinds of skills. How do you flex your creativity and your novelty with your own stuff? I said that contentment pairs really well with experimentation, because you can experiment and try to find, well, what does contentment mean to me? What does contentment with my stuff or in this particular aspect of life, how does that actually look? I've mentioned a few times over the last few days about my contentment projects in 2022, and I devised like 20 or so projects, some of which were on YouTube, some of which weren't, where I just tried a bunch of stuff. Capsule wardrobe challenges. I did a lot. I did some like photo challenges and outfit challenges. Like I recreated, there's a couple of songs from the neighborhood and I made outfits based off of songs. So if you are thinking of changing your shopping habits or you're on that journey, I would start with perhaps like your biggest problem area or the thing you find that you're shopping for the most. How can you find contentment with that area or appreciate those things? How can you find novelty and enjoyment and fun with what you already have? Or maybe it's not with what you already have, but how can you do those things without shopping? Because sometimes it can be shopping your own closet or recreating stuff. Other times it can be things like finding your own community. You can ask yourself, let's say you're a knitter. What do I really like about knitting? How could I do more of that? Maybe there are specific projects that you really like making. Maybe you really like making hats because it's a quicker project for you to do, or you just have that skill down really well and you can do more complex skills. Maybe you make more hats, or maybe you really enjoy being challenged and you have some old patterns that you bought a couple years ago and never tried because you feel like they're a little bit more complicated to you. If you're a challenge gal, throw up those challenges to yourself. Maybe you really like knitting with friends, or you really like knitting watching a show. Maybe you arrange more of that. Maybe you enjoy tracking projects and I love tracking stuff. It just kind of gives me a little bit of a high. And so I have found ways to track things. I track my wardrobe. I was feeling a little itchy about my wardrobe, I need a little novelty. So I downloaded a wardrobe tracking app and I have been now tracking it for close to a year. And that's how I kind of get that fun or pleasure. And when I think about this lens of experimentation as well, I know we're talking about contentment, but this is connecting. When I have viewed things through the lens of experimentation, it also kind of gets me to brainstorm or to find solutions. And so when I am feeling a certain way, right? Like I was saying, I was feeling bored and itchy with my wardrobe. My first thought is, okay, what kind of experiment can I conduct to fix this? What can I do about it? And it kind of gets the ball rolling about things that I can do and ways that I can approach it. Instead of just like, why am I feeling this way? Let me journal about it. Sure, there's time and place for that. But this experimentation lens gets me excited about crafting solutions and finding things to do about it. I am not always that way about it. I am not always solution oriented, but the more I lean into experimentation, the more I find myself leaning into that. So that's everything from me today. Those are my 5 skills that I would myself try to cultivate if I was starting my own conscious consumption journey for the first time in 2025. I would love to hear what your top 5 skills would be if you were going on your journey for the first time, or maybe you are. What would you like to learn? Maybe you're in the middle of the journey. What skills have really served you? I would love to hear all of this in the comments. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today and coming along for this video. I loved having you here, and I hope to see you again around here soon.